In the heart of the Bavarian Alps lies one of the greatest mysteries of European history. Neuschwanstein Castle is a creation that contemporaries called a crazy whim, but descendants recognized as a masterpiece. But was this fairy tale castle just the embodiment of royal dreams, or were there deeper secrets behind its construction? The story of King Ludwig II of Bavaria, his mysterious death, and the mystical symbols in the castle's architecture continue to intrigue researchers to this day. Today, we will try to unravel the mystery of Neuschwanstein and find out whether it was the castle of a mad king or the mystical center of a secret society. Subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on new investigations into historical mysteries and secrets of the past. And in the comments, share your opinion. Do you think King Ludwig II's death was suicide, or was it a planned murder? Which version seems most plausible to you? In the heart of the Bavarian Alps, on a rocky outcrop above the village of Neuschwanstein, stands a castle that looks like something out of a grim fairy tale. Neuschwanstein is a creation that contemporaries called the crazy whim of a dreamer king, but descendants recognized as one of the greatest architectural masterpieces of the 19th century. This snow-white castle with towers reaching for the sky has become a symbol of romanticism and, at the same time, the subject of endless controversy and mystery. Construction of Neuschwanstein began in 1869 on the orders of Bavarian King Ludwig II, whose personality remains one of the most mysterious in European history. Officially, the castle was intended as the king's private residence, a place where he could escape from state affairs and indulge in his dreams of medieval knights. However, even his contemporaries suspected that there was more to this project than a simple desire to build a beautiful palace. The architecture of Neuschwanstein is striking in its uniqueness even today. The castle combines elements of Romanesque and Gothic styles, but is equipped with the most advanced technical innovations of its time. Central heating, hot water, telephone communication, and electric lighting all appeared in the castle long before they became commonplace in European palaces. This combination of archaic appearance and modern technology suggests that the castle was built not only for comfortable living, but also for some special purpose. The interior decoration of the castle is particularly noteworthy. The halls are decorated with frescoes and paintings depicting scenes from German mythology and Richard Wagner's operas. The throne room is striking in its splendor. Its ceiling is decorated with an image of the sky with the 12 signs of the zodiac, and the throne itself is located on a platform accessed by 12 steps. Symbolism of numbers and astrological motifs are found throughout the castle, giving rise to various interpretations of the hidden meaning of these decorative elements. Construction of the castle continued for 17 years and was never completed by the time Ludwig II died in 1886. Of the planned 360 rooms, only 15 were completed. But even in this state, the castle made a stunning impression on everyone who visited it. The king himself spent only 170 days in the castle, but according to some researchers, these days were key to understanding the true purpose of Neuschwanstein. The location of the castle also raises questions. Neuschwanstein was built on the site of two ancient castles, the front and rear Hohenschwangau, whose ruins were demolished to make way for the new construction. This area has been considered special since ancient times. Ancient trade routes passed through here, and archaeologists have found traces of pagan cults in the surrounding caves. Many of the king's contemporaries considered the choice of this particular location for the construction of his residence to be no coincidence. The financing of the construction is also shrouded in mystery. Officially, the project was paid for from the king's personal funds, but the amounts spent on Neuschwanstein far exceeded the Bavarian treasury's capabilities. By the time Ludwig II died, the kingdom was on the verge of bankruptcy, and the debts for the construction of the castle amounted to an astronomical sum. Where the additional funds came from is a question that still has no definitive answer. Workers involved in the construction spoke of strange requirements that were imposed on some of the rooms in the castle. In particular, special attention was paid to the acoustic properties of the halls. Some rooms were designed so that the sound in them had special characteristics. Rooms were equipped in the basement, the purpose of which remained unclear even to the project architects. Today, Neuschwanstein is visited by over 1 million tourists from all over the world every year. The castle has become not only a symbol of Bavaria, but also a source of inspiration for the creators of Disney's Sleeping Beauty castle. However, behind its tourist appeal lie many unsolved mysteries. Researchers continue to study the archives related to the construction of the castle in the hope of finding answers to questions that preoccupied Ludwig II's contemporaries. Neuschwanstein remains a mystery that attracts not only tourists, but also historians, art critics, and followers of various esoteric teachings. Was this castle simply the embodiment of the romantic dreams of a dreamer king? Or were there deeper motives behind its construction? This question continues to intrigue researchers to this day. King Ludwig II of Bavaria went down in history under many nicknames: the Fairy King, the Swan King, the Mad King of Bavaria. Each of these names reflects certain traits of his complex and contradictory personality. Born on August 25, 1845, in Nymphenburg Palace in Munich, Ludwig was surrounded from childhood by an atmosphere of romanticism and dreaminess that left an indelible mark on his entire life. Ludwig's father, King Maximilian II, was an enlightened and liberal-minded man, a patron of science and the arts. His mother, Princess Maria of Prussia, was deeply religious and inclined toward mysticism. This combination of rational and irrational elements in his family upbringing undoubtedly influenced the formation of the future king's character. From early childhood, Ludwig showed unusual abilities. He learned languages easily, was fascinated by history and literature, but at the same time avoided communication with his peers and preferred solitude. At the age of 18, after the sudden death of his father in 1864, Ludwig unexpectedly found himself on the Bavarian throne. The young king was not ready for his duties as head of state. He was more interested in art, music, and theater than politics and diplomacy. Already in the first years of his reign, it became clear that the new monarch lived more in a world of his own dreams than in the reality of the 19th century. Ludwig was particularly influenced by his acquaintance with the music of Richard Wagner. The king became not only an admirer of the composer, but also his main patron, investing huge sums in the production of Wagner's operas. Contemporaries noted that Ludwig often confused reality with Wagner's operas. He saw himself as a hero of German legends and perceived the world around him through the prism of mythological stories. This peculiarity of the king's psyche was reflected in the architecture of his castles, including Neuschwanstein. Ludwig's personal life was full of mysteries. Despite his engagement to Princess Sophie, sister of the Austrian Empress Elizabeth, the wedding never took place. The king broke off the engagement shortly before the ceremony, causing a real scandal in European royal courts. After that, Ludwig never married, which gave rise to many rumors about his personal life and mental state. The king's interests went far beyond the usual concerns of a monarch. He studied the occult, was interested in astrology and alchemy, and collected a library of rare esoteric books. Treatises on magic, astronomical charts, and various objects that his contemporaries considered attributes of occult practices were found in his chambers. This fascination with mysticism was reflected in the symbolism that permeated the architecture of Neuschwanstein. Ludwig's behavior became increasingly eccentric over the years. He avoided daylight, preferring to be active at night, held lavish dinners for imaginary guests, and talked to portraits of French kings whom he considered his spiritual ancestors. The king could sit alone for hours, lost in thought, and then suddenly give strange orders that baffled his ministers and servants. The king's demands regarding ceremony were particularly strange. He insisted that rituals more reminiscent of medieval ceremonies than modern palace etiquette be observed when meeting him. Ludwig demanded that his courtiers dress in costumes from specific eras, and that certain ceremonies be held by candlelight at strictly defined times of day. Ludwig's financial policy was a serious concern for the Bavarian government. The king spent enormous sums not only on building castles, but also on various projects whose purpose remained unclear even to those closest to him. Money was spent on rare books, works of art, and on paying people who today would be called consultants on esoteric matters. Ludwig's relationship with his subjects was contradictory. On the one hand, the common people loved their fairy tale king for his generosity and unusualness. On the other hand, the aristocracy and government circles were increasingly concerned about the monarch's competence. There were frequent cases when the king made decisions that ran counter to the interests of Bavaria, which created serious political problems. By the mid-1880s, Ludwig's behavior had become so unpredictable that his ministers began to seriously discuss the possibility of removing the king from power. A medical examination conducted without a personal examination of the monarch declared him unfit to rule. However, many contemporaries and historians doubt the objectivity of this conclusion, suggesting that it was motivated by political motives rather than real problems with the king's mental health. The history of Neuschwanstein Castle began in 1867, when King Ludwig II first visited the ruins of the medieval castle of Hohenschwangau, together with the famous theater artist Christian Jung. This visit was a turning point in the king's life. It was then that he came up with the idea of creating a castle that would embody his ideas about the medieval knightly ideal. However, even the first sketches created by Jung, based on Ludwig's instructions, were striking in their unusualness and departure from the traditional canons of castle architecture. The initial design of the castle was developed in strict secrecy. The king personally participated in the creation of each sketch, making changes that often stumped the architects. Ludwig insisted on including elements in the design that at first glance seemed purely decorative, but upon closer inspection revealed a deep symbolic meaning. Particular attention was paid to the orientation of the castle, to the cardinal points, and the location of the main halls in relation to astronomical objects. The site for construction was not chosen by chance. The rock on which Neuschwanstein was to be built had been considered sacred since ancient times. Archaeological research conducted in the 20th century confirmed that an ancient sanctuary, presumably of Celtic origin, had once stood here. The ruins of the old castles of Vorder and Hinterhohenwang were completely demolished, despite their historical value, which sparked protests from medieval architecture experts. Construction work began on September 5, 1869, with the ceremonial laying of the first stone. The ceremony was held in a small circle of the king's entourage and was unusual in nature. Instead of the traditional religious consecration, a ceremony was held that was more reminiscent of an ancient ritual. Witnesses noted that the king gave a speech in Latin, the content of which remains unknown, as those present signed a non-disclosure agreement. The project was entrusted to architect Edward Riedel, who had previously worked on other projects for the king. However, Ludwig himself exercised real control over the construction, regularly visiting the site and personally inspecting the progress of the work. The king demanded strict adherence to all details of the project, even if this led to significant increases in construction costs or technical difficulties. A distinctive feature of the project was the use of the most advanced technologies of the time. The castle was planned to have central heating with hot air supplied through special channels, a hot water supply system, and later, electric lighting and telephone communication. This combination of a medieval exterior with modern amenities was innovative for its time and required the development of special engineering solutions. The project was initially planned to be financed from the king's personal funds, but in the first years of construction, it became clear that the costs would significantly exceed the initial estimates. The king took out loans secured by future income, which threatened the financial stability of the kingdom. Attempts by ministers to limit construction costs were met with fierce resistance from Ludwig, who considered Neuschwanstein his life's work. The interior design of the castle was carried out in parallel with the construction and was also distinguished by unusual requirements. The king insisted that each room have a specific theme related to German mythology or Wagner's operas. The throne room was to embody the idea of the Holy Grail. The king's bedroom was to feature scenes from Tristan and Isolde, and the singing hall was to depict scenes from Tannhäuser and Lohengrin. Work on the castle progressed slowly due to the complexity of the terrain and unusual architectural solutions. Each stone had to be lifted to a considerable height, for which special lifting mechanisms were designed. The builders noted that some of the king's requirements regarding the thickness of the walls and the configuration of the rooms seemed excessive for a normal residential building, but were mandatory. Particular attention was paid to the acoustic properties of the halls. A unique acoustic system was created in the singing hall to achieve perfect sound quality. Such technical solutions required consultation with specialists in various fields, from architecture to acoustics. The king personally listened to acoustic tests and demanded improvements until the desired result was achieved. By 1876, the main construction work had been completed, but the interior decoration continued for another 10 years. The king moved into the castle, although many rooms were not yet ready for use. It was during this period that the most intensive work began on the interior decoration, which was to transform Neuschwanstein into a unique work of art. The architecture of Neuschwanstein is a unique combination of different styles and eras, creating the impression of a building that exists outside of time. The architectural concept is based on the neo-Romanesque style with Gothic elements, but a closer look reveals details that are not typical of traditional European castle architecture. These features have led researchers to believe that knowledge and principles beyond the scope of ordinary 19th century architectural practice were used in the design of the castle. The exterior of the castle is striking for its upward thrust. Multiple towers, spires, and bay windows create a complex silhouette that seems weightless despite the massiveness of the stone walls. The central tower rises 65 meters above the base of the castle, making it visible from a distance of several kilometers. Such a height was unusual for residential castles and had more symbolic than practical significance. The layout of the castle raises questions among experts in medieval architecture. The rooms are connected by a system of corridors and staircases, creating a complex labyrinth inside the building. Some rooms have several levels connected by spiral staircases, creating a feeling of endless space. This layout is not typical for the practical needs of a royal residence, but resembles the layout of temple complexes in various cultures. The castle's throne room is the most mysterious room in the entire complex. The hall is shaped like a Byzantine basilica and decorated in a style that combines Christian and pagan symbols. The ceiling is decorated with an image of the starry sky, with constellations arranged according to an astronomical map of a specific date, which researchers are still trying to determine. The throne itself is located in the apse on a raised platform, accessed by 12 marble steps, which, according to some interpreters, symbolize the zodiacal cycle. The singing hall, dedicated to Wagner's operas, also features unusual architectural solutions. The hall has a complex acoustic system that creates a surround sound effect. The walls are decorated with frescoes depicting scenes from German legends, but the arrangement of these images follows a specific system that may be related to ancient mnemonic techniques or ritual practices. The king's bedroom is striking for its decor and symbolism. The bed is Gothic in style and resembles an altar rather than a place to sleep. The walls are decorated with scenes from the legend of Tristan and Isolde, but the composition of the frescoes gives the impression that they tell not only a love story, but also contain a coded message. The windows of the bedroom are oriented in such a way that on certain days of the year, sunlight falls on specific elements of the decor, creating light effects. The basement rooms of the castle remain the least studied part of the complex. They housed technical rooms, but there were also rooms of unknown purpose. Some of these rooms have vaulted ceilings and stone benches around the perimeter, giving them the appearance of ancient temples or meeting places. Access to these rooms was restricted even to the king's servants. The castle's ventilation and heating system is particularly noteworthy. Air ducts are laid not only in the walls, but also under the floors of some rooms, creating a complex network of air passages. This system not only maintained a comfortable temperature, but also created acoustic effects. Sounds made in one room could be heard in another, located at a considerable distance. The symbols used in the castle's decor go beyond the usual heraldic tradition. Along with Bavarian and royal symbols, there are images characteristic of various esoteric teachings. Swans, griffins, dragons, and other mythical creatures are arranged in a specific order, which may represent a symbolic map or diagram. Some researchers see in this symbolism the influence of the Rosicrucians or other secret societies. The castle's technical equipment was revolutionary for its time. The electric lighting system, installed in 1881, was one of the first in Europe. A telephone system connected different parts of the castle and also provided contact with the outside world. These innovations required considerable technical knowledge and financial investment, which raises questions about the true motives behind their implementation. The location of the castle also holds mysteries. Neuschwanstein is built at the intersection of several natural lines, watercourses, mountain ranges, and ancient roads. Such a location is characteristic of sacred places in various cultures and may indicate that the site was chosen not only for aesthetic reasons. Modern research shows that geomagnetic anomalies have been observed in the area around the castle, which may have influenced the choice of a specific site for construction. By the early 1880s, the financial situation of the Bavarian kingdom had become critical. The construction of Ludwig II's castles, Neuschwanstein, Linderhof, and Herrenchiemsee, consumed enormous sums of money, several times exceeding the annual income of the royal treasury. According to contemporary estimates, more than 6 million marks were spent on Neuschwanstein alone, which was an astronomical sum for that time. These expenses threatened not only the financial stability of the kingdom, but also the political independence of Bavaria. The king's ministers repeatedly tried to convince Ludwig to cut construction costs, but all their attempts were met with a categorical refusal. The king considered his castles not a luxury, but a necessity, although the nature of this necessity remained unclear even to his closest associates. When, in 1879, the finance minister presented the king with a report on the critical state of the state treasury, Ludwig replied that the money would be found, but did not explain how. The sources of funding for the king's construction projects remain a subject of debate among historians. Officially, all expenses were covered by loans taken out by the king against future income from royal property. However, the amounts obtained in this way were clearly insufficient to cover all expenses. Some researchers suggest that Ludwig received financial support from some external sources, but no documentary evidence of this version has been found. Particularly mysterious are the expenses for the purchase of rare materials and works of art for the castles. The king acquired ancient manuscripts, medieval tapestries, and works of art, the cost of which often exceeded the cost of construction work. Many of these items had no obvious decorative value, but apparently were of particular interest to the king. Among the purchases were alchemical treatises, astrological charts, and items that contemporaries called magical artifacts. Attempts by the Bavarian government to control the king's spending led to serious conflicts. Ludwig believed that as monarch, he had the right to dispose of state finances as he saw fit, and regarded any restrictions as an encroachment on royal prerogatives. In 1882, the king even threatened to abdicate if his ministers continued to interfere with his building plans. The king's creditors began to show concern as early as the late 1770s. Bankers from Munich, Frankfurt, and other financial centers in Germany refused to grant new loans without serious guarantees. Ludwig then turned to less traditional sources of financing, including private moneylenders and, according to some reports, representatives of secret societies who may have been interested in his projects for reasons unrelated to profit. The situation was exacerbated by the fact that the kingdom's revenues were declining due to general economic problems in Germany. The unification of the country under Prussian leadership led to changes in trade routes and industrial structure, which had a negative impact on the Bavarian economy. Tax revenues declined, while the costs of maintaining the royal court and building castles continued to rise. By 1884, the king's debts had reached 14 million marks, an amount that exceeded the entire kingdom's annual budget. Creditors began demanding immediate repayment of the debts, threatening legal action and even the seizure of royal property. This situation was unprecedented in the history of European monarchies and posed a serious threat to the prestige of the Bavarian crown. Attempts to find new sources of financing led the king to increasingly dubious deals. Ludwig considered selling part of the royal lands, taking out loans from foreign banks secured by future tax revenues, and even turned to representatives of various financial groups whose nature remained unclear. Some of these negotiations were conducted in the strictest secrecy and were not reflected in official documents. The king's ministers insisted more and more on stopping construction and cutting court expenses. In 1885, The government even tried to freeze all payments related to castle construction. But the king found ways to get around these restrictions. He began to personally guarantee debts, using his royal title as collateral, which threatened the very institution of the monarchy in Bavaria. The financial crisis was exacerbated by the fact that significant sums were spent not only on visible construction work, but also on projects that even the king's ministers knew nothing about. Bills for various consultations, research, and special services accounted for a significant portion of the expenses, but their purpose remained a mystery. These expenditures gave rise to various speculations that the king was financing some secret projects not directly related to architecture and art. The situation reached a critical point in early 1886, when it became clear that the kingdom was on the verge of bankruptcy. It was the financial crisis that became one of the main arguments used by the king's opponents to justify his removal from power. As the kingdom's financial problems worsened, Ludwig II's behavior became increasingly eccentric and unpredictable. Contemporaries noted that the king appeared less and less at public events, avoided meetings with ministers and diplomats, preferring to spend time alone in his castles. His daily routine changed completely. Ludwig slept during the day and stayed awake at night, which created significant difficulties for the conduct of state affairs. The king's servants recounted their master's strange habits. Ludwig often held lavish dinners for imaginary guests, setting the table for several people and engaging in lively conversation with invisible companions. Such receptions were especially frequent in honor of the French kings Louis XIV, XV, and XVI, whose portraits hung in the castle dining room. The king could spend hours telling these portraits about his plans and problems, as if expecting a response from them. Ludwig spent more and more time in the castle library, studying ancient manuscripts and esoteric treatises. He was particularly interested in works on alchemy, astrology, and various occult sciences. The king made numerous notes in the margins of books, drew diagrams and charts, the meaning of which remained incomprehensible even to his secretaries. Some of these notes were written in code, the key to which has never been found. The king's relationship with those around him became increasingly tense. Ludwig demanded that his servants observe a complex ceremonial code, which changed without warning and often included elements that were not characteristic of traditional court etiquette. The king could suddenly order everyone present to dress in costumes from a particular historical era, or demand that they speak to him only in Latin or Old German. The king's requirements for lighting were particularly strange. Electric lighting was almost never used in the castle, even though it was one of the first places in Europe to have it installed. Ludwig preferred candles and torches, claiming that artificial light distorts the perception of reality. Sometimes he demanded that meetings be held by the light of a certain number of candles, arranged in a strictly defined order. The king's musical tastes also underwent changes. Whereas he had previously been an ardent admirer of Wagner, he now increasingly commissioned performances of ancient church hymns, Gregorian chants, and even music that he called prehistoric. Concerts were held in the castle's throne room at EBD midnight, and the king demanded that the musicians play with their eyes closed, so as not to be distracted by the material world. The king's correspondence during this period also contained oddities. Ludwig wrote letters to historical figures who had died centuries ago and apparently expected a reply. His archives contain letters to Emperor Charlemagne, King Arthur, and even ancient philosophers. These letters were written in accordance with all the formalities of official diplomatic correspondence and discussed serious political and philosophical issues. The king's diet was a subject of particular attention among his entourage. Ludwig refused to eat most foods, claiming that they were contaminated by modern civilization. He demanded that his food be prepared according to medieval recipes using ingredients grown naturally. Special attention was paid to water. The king drank only water from specific mountain sources, which was specially delivered to the castle. The king's medical care also became problematic. Ludwig refused the services of modern doctors, preferring to be treated with herbs and methods he had studied in ancient medical treatises. He claimed that modern medicine was based on false principles and could only do harm. Instead of doctors, the king consulted people he called keepers of ancient knowledge. Ludwig's religious views underwent significant changes. While formally remaining a Catholic, he became increasingly interested in pre-Christian beliefs and Eastern religious systems. Statues of Eastern deities, altars for various rituals, and a library of religious texts from a wide variety of traditions appeared in the castle. The king claimed that he was studying the true religion of mankind, which existed before the division into different denominations. Relations with his family and courtiers became increasingly strained. The king's relatives expressed serious concern about his condition and repeatedly tried to persuade Ludwig to seek medical help. However, the king perceived their concern as an attempt to prevent him from carrying out some important mission, which he hinted at without revealing its nature. By the beginning of 1886, the king's behavior had become so unusual that even his most loyal servants began to doubt his mental health. Ludwig could spend entire days in complete silence and then suddenly launch into long monologues on topics that seemed incoherent to those around him. These changes in the king's behavior became one of the arguments that his opponents later used to justify his removal from power. By the beginning of 1886, the situation surrounding King Ludwig II had reached a critical point. The kingdom's financial crisis, the monarch's strange behavior, and his complete isolation from state affairs created a situation that the Bavarian political elite found intolerable. The initiator of decisive action was Prince Luitpold, the king's uncle, who, with the consent of other members of the royal family, began to prepare a plan to remove Ludwig from power. The formal reason for the action was the conclusion of a medical commission that the king was unfit to rule. However, this conclusion raises serious questions among modern historians, since none of the doctors on the commission personally examined Ludwig. The commission, headed by psychiatrist Bernhard von Gudden, based its findings exclusively on the testimony of the king's servants and members of the government. This procedure contradicted all principles of medical diagnosis, even by the standards of the time. The composition of the medical commission also raises questions. In addition to Gudden, it included doctors who had no previous experience in treating mental illness or were known for their political views, which did not coincide with the king's position. Some researchers suggest that the members of the commission were under pressure from political circles interested in removing Ludwig from power. The commission's official conclusion was that the king was suffering from progressive psychosis and was unable to perform his duties. Symptoms included eccentric behavior, sleep disturbances, avoidance of social interaction, and obsessive ideas about building. However, many of these symptoms had been characteristic of Ludwig throughout his life and had not prevented him from ruling successfully for 22 years. On June 9, 1886, the Bavarian government officially declared the king incapable of ruling, and Prince Luitpold was appointed regent. Ludwig learned of this decision from his secretary, and, according to eyewitnesses, took the news with surprising calm. The king merely remarked that everything is happening as it was meant to be. The king's attempts to challenge the decision on the regency were unsuccessful. Ludwig turned to the Bavarian people for support, but his appeals did not receive a widespread response. The common people, who had previously loved their fairy tale king, were frightened by rumors of his mental illness. In addition, the economic difficulties caused by Ludwig's wasteful policies turned a significant part of the population against him. The king was particularly hurt by the betrayal of his closest associates. Many of those whom he had trusted for years testified against him before a medical commission. Secretaries, valets, and even courtiers who had served the king for a long time suddenly began to talk about his eccentricities and inappropriate behavior. This betrayal shook Ludwig more than his removal from power. The international reaction to the events in Bavaria was mixed. Some European monarchs expressed support for the principle that a legitimate king could not be deposed without his consent. Austrian Emperor Franz Joseph even offered Ludwig asylum in his domain. However, most governments preferred not to interfere in Bavaria's internal affairs, especially given Prussia's growing influence in German affairs. The role of the Prussian government in the events of 1866 remains a subject of debate among historians. Bismarck was interested in weakening the independence of the Bavarian monarchy and incorporating Bavaria into the German Empire as an ordinary province. The removal of Ludwig, who had always defended Bavarian separatism, could have helped achieve these goals. Some documents indicate that Prussian intelligence was informed of the impending coup in advance. After the announcement of the regency, Ludwig was effectively arrested at Neuschwanstein Castle. Officially, this was called placement under medical supervision, but the king was deprived of his freedom of movement and communication with the outside world. His correspondence was censored, and visits were strictly limited. Such treatment of a legitimate monarch was unprecedented in European history. On June 12th, the king was transferred from Neuschwanstein to Burg Castle on the shores of Lake Starnberg. Officially, this transfer was explained by the need to provide the king with better conditions for treatment. But many contemporaries saw it as preparation for even more decisive action against Ludwig. Burg Castle was under the complete control of the regent's supporters, which ruled out any attempts by the king to restore his power. In Burg Castle, Ludwig was under constant surveillance by Dr. Gooden and several orderlies. The king was stripped of all his royal prerogatives and effectively turned into a prisoner. His daily routine was strictly regulated, meetings with outsiders were prohibited, and attempts to leave the castle were suppressed. Less than a day after his arrival in Berg, Ludwig II was dead, in circumstances that still raise questions and suspicions. On June 13, 1886, at around 6:30 p.m., King Ludwig II went for a walk in the park of Burg Castle, accompanied by Dr. Bernhard von Gooden. It was a regular evening walk that the doctor had recommended to the king to keep him healthy. But this walk turned out to be the last one in the Bavarian monarch's life. A few hours later, both of them were found dead in Lake Starnberg. The circumstances surrounding the discovery of the bodies raise many questions. The search began around 11 p.m., when the walk took longer than usual. The bodies of the king and the doctor were found in shallow water a few meters apart. The depth at the site of discovery was less than a meter, making accidental drowning unlikely, especially for two adult men. The bodies were initially examined by a local doctor who found no signs of violence. However, a more detailed examination conducted later revealed a number of oddities. The king's body had scratches and abrasions that could have been caused by a struggle. In addition, Ludwig's lungs did not contain water, which cast doubt on the drowning theory. Dr. Gooden suffered serious head injuries, 2 deep wounds that clearly could not have been the result of an accidental fall. The doctor's right eye was damaged, and there were signs of blows to his face. These injuries indicated that Gooden had been involved in some kind of struggle before his death. However, the official conclusion explained these injuries as being caused by blows against rocks at the bottom of the lake. The testimony of witnesses who were near the scene of the tragedy that evening contained contradictions. Fishermen working on the lake claimed to have heard screams and sounds of a struggle coming from the shore. However, during the official investigation, some of these witnesses changed their testimony, stating that they had not heard anything unusual. Of particular note is the fact that the castle's security was reduced to a minimum that evening. The king's walks were usually accompanied by several guards, but on June 13th, Ludwig went out alone with his doctor. This decision was made at the last minute, and, according to the official version, was explained by a desire to allow the king to talk quietly with his doctor. The king's behavior on the day of the tragedy also contained unusual moments. According to servants, Ludwig was unusually calm and even cheerful, which contrasted with his depressed state in the previous days. The king talked at length with his valet, gave him several personal items as a memento, and asked him to take care of some matters, as if he were preparing for a long absence. The king's correspondence found after his death contained mysterious notes. In his last letter, addressed to an unknown correspondent, Ludwig wrote that a great deed is nearing completion, and that he was ready to make the ultimate sacrifice. This letter was never sent, but its contents gave rise to various interpretations of the king's intentions. The suicide version, which was officially accepted by the authorities, was based on the assumption that the king decided to take his own life due to depression caused by his removal from power. According to this version, Ludwig attacked Dr. Gooden when he tried to prevent the suicide and then drowned himself in a lake. However, this version did not explain many of the oddities discovered during the investigation. Alternative versions of what happened appeared almost immediately after the tragedy. Some contemporaries suggested that the king had been killed by agents acting on the orders of political opponents. Others believed that Ludwig's death was the result of an accident during an escape attempt. Still others put forward versions linked to the activities of secret societies. The investigation into the tragedy was conducted in an unusually short time. Just 2 days after the bodies were found, the official version of events was announced, which did not allow for a full investigation of all the circumstances of the case. Many documents related to the investigation were classified and only became available to researchers in the 20th century. Some materials disappeared without a trace and were never found. The official version of King Ludwig II's death, presented by the Bavarian authorities, stated that the monarch committed suicide by drowning himself in Lake Starnberg. According to this version, the king was in a state of deep depression due to his removal from power and decided to end his life. Dr. Gooden, who tried to prevent the suicide, was killed by the king in a fit of madness, after which Ludwig threw himself into the lake. The medical report signed by a commission of doctors confirmed the suicide version. The reasons given were progressive melancholia and suicidal tendencies, which allegedly developed in the king against the backdrop of mental illness. The doctors claimed that Ludwig's behavior in the last days of his life indicated his intention to take his own life. However, this version was met with serious doubts by many of his contemporaries from the very beginning. Ludwig II was known as a deeply religious man, and suicide was considered a grave sin in the Catholic tradition. The king repeatedly spoke out against suicide in his letters and conversations, calling it cowardice and blasphemy. Such a drastic change of heart seemed unlikely. Physical evidence also did not support the drowning theory. Ludwig II was a tall and physically strong man, an excellent swimmer since childhood. The depth of the lake at the site where the body was found was only about 1 meter, which made drowning virtually impossible for a man of his height and swimming ability. In addition, the water in the lake was warm enough for June, and hypothermia could not have been the cause of death. The absence of water in the king's lungs was one of the main arguments against the drowning theory. Modern forensic medicine knows that drowned people always have water in their airways, but this was not observed in Ludwig's case. This indicated that the king was already dead when he fell into the water or died of other causes before he could drown. The timing of the tragedy also raises questions. The king and the doctor went for a walk at around 6:30 in the evening, and their bodies were found after 11 o'clock. During this time, they had to walk a relatively short distance through a familiar park, which does not explain such a long absence. Some researchers suggest that a significant part of this time was spent on events that are not reflected in the official version. The behavior of the authorities after the tragedy also appeared suspicious. The scene was immediately cordoned off, and only officials were allowed access. Independent observers were not allowed to examine the scene of the tragedy, which ruled out the possibility of an alternative investigation. Such secrecy was unusual for an investigation into a suicide. Witness statements that could have shed light on the events of that evening were classified or disappeared from the archives. Fishermen working on the lake initially claimed to have heard screams and sounds of a struggle, but later changed their statements. Some of these people received financial compensation from the government, raising suspicions of witness tampering. The king's funeral was held in strict secrecy. Ludwig II's coffin was closed, and none of his relatives or friends were allowed to say goodbye to the deceased. This procedure was unusual for the funerals of European monarchs and gave rise to rumors that the authorities were hiding the true causes and circumstances of the king's death. The motives for suicide given in the official version also seem dubious. Throughout his life, Ludwig II demonstrated an ability to overcome difficulties and find a way out of difficult situations. Even after his removal from power, the king still had considerable personal wealth and opportunities for a comfortable life in exile. Several European courts offered him asylum. According to eyewitness accounts, the king's mental state in the last days of his life did not correspond to a picture of deep depression. Ludwig was calm, went about his usual business, and made plans for the future. On the day of his death, he even expressed a desire to see some friends, which is not typical of a person preparing to commit suicide. Dr. Gudden's role in the tragedy remains unclear. According to the official version, the doctor heroically tried to save the king, but was killed by him in a fit of madness. However, the nature of Gudden's injuries indicates that he was involved in a serious struggle that lasted quite a long time. This does not correspond to the description of a sudden attack of aggression by a mentally ill person. The official version of King Ludwig II's suicide suited the Bavarian government, as it ruled out questions about possible murder and political motives for the tragedy. However, numerous inconsistencies in this version continue to spark debate among historians and researchers. Alternative versions of King Ludwig II's death began to appear almost immediately after the official announcement of his suicide. Many contemporaries doubted the veracity of the official version. and put forward their own theories about what happened on June 13, 1886, on the shores of Lake Starnberg. The most widespread alternative version was the theory that the king was murdered for political reasons. Supporters of the murder theory pointed out that Ludwig's death was extremely beneficial to certain political circles. The king had always defended Bavaria's independence from Prussian influence and was opposed to full integration into the German Empire. His removal paved the way for Bavaria's deeper subjugation to Berlin's interests. Prince Luitpold, who became regent, was known for his pro-German views. The role of the Prussian Secret Service in the possible assassination of the king has been the subject of lengthy debate. Bismarck had every reason to want Ludwig dead, as the Bavarian king could have become a symbol of resistance to Prussian hegemony in Germany. Some documents that only became available in the 20th century indicate that Prussian intelligence was closely monitoring Ludwig and had detailed information about his entourage. The technical execution of the murder, if it took place, required careful preparation and the involvement of professionals. The version that a group of assassins was operating on the lake shore that evening explains many of the oddities of what happened. The struggle, traces of which were found on Dr. Gudden's body, could have been the result of his attempt to protect the king or to witness the crime. Researchers pay particular attention to the figure of Countess Elisabeth von Sixten-Wettstein, who was a close friend of the king and may have had information about the conspiracy against him. After Ludwig's death, the countess repeatedly claimed that the king had been murdered and named possible organizers of the crime. However, her testimony was not taken into account by the official investigation. Financial motives for the murder should not be ruled out either. The king's death automatically terminated all his financial obligations and freed his creditors from having to wait for the repayment of their loans. Some of Ludwig's creditors had connections to influential political circles and may have been interested in a radical solution to the financial problem. The theory of a failed escape attempt by the king also has its supporters. According to this theory, Ludwig planned to flee Berg Castle with the help of loyal supporters, but the plan was discovered, leading to the tragedy. The struggle on the lakeshore may have been the result of an attempt to detain the king, which ended in his death. This version explains Ludwig's calmness on the day of his death and his strange orders to his servants. The role of secret societies in the king's death has been the subject of numerous conspiracy theories. Some researchers suggest that Ludwig was a member or patron of occult organizations that may have had their own plans for the king. The death may have been the result of internal conflict within these circles or an attempt to prevent the king from revealing certain secrets. Medical aspects of the case also give rise to alternative versions. A modern examination of the king's remains, carried out at the end of the 20th century, revealed traces that may indicate poisoning. Although the results of this examination are not conclusive due to the poor condition of the material, they cast doubt on the official version of death by drowning. Eyewitness accounts that were classified or altered may have contained key information about the events of that evening. Some of these witnesses later recounted in private conversations that they had seen several people on the shore of the lake, not just the king and the doctor. These accounts were not officially recorded, but were passed on by word of mouth among the local population. The behavior of the authorities after the tragedy also supports the theory that the true circumstances of the king's death were concealed. The unusually quick investigation, the classification of documents, and the ban on independent expert examination are all characteristic of attempts to cover up a crime. If it had really been a suicide, such precautions would have been unnecessary. The international reaction to Ludwig II's death also contained hints of doubts about the official version. Some European diplomats expressed their conviction in private letters that the Bavarian king had been murdered. However, these suspicions were not officially voiced for reasons of diplomatic correctness. Alternative versions of King Ludwig II's death continue to be discussed by researchers today. Although no definitive proof of murder has ever been found, numerous inconsistencies in the official version prevent the case from being considered closed. The architecture of Neuschwanstein Castle is rich in symbolism that goes far beyond the usual decorative design of royal residences. A detailed study of the castle's interiors reveals a complex system of mystical symbols that may indicate the deep esoteric knowledge of their creators. These symbols are found in almost all rooms of the castle, but are particularly concentrated in the throne room, the king's bedroom, and the singing hall. The throne room of the castle contains the most obvious mystical elements. The ceiling of the hall is decorated with an image of the starry sky with constellations, but the arrangement of the stars does not correspond to the actual astronomical map. Instead, the constellations form certain geometric figures that resemble Kabbalistic diagrams or alchemical symbols. In the center of the ceiling is an image of the sun surrounded by 12 smaller luminaries, which may symbolize the solar cult or the zodiacal cycle. The columns of the throne room are decorated with capitals depicting plant ornaments, but on closer inspection, it turns out that these are not just decorative elements. The plants are selected in such a way as to form a symbolic herbarium associated with various magical traditions. Here you can find oak, a symbol of strength and wisdom, laurel, a symbol of victory and prophecy, ivy, a symbol of eternal life, and other plants that have special significance in esoteric teachings. The 12 steps leading to the throne are also not a random architectural decision. The number 12 has sacred significance in many cultures. It is the number of apostles, signs of the zodiac, and months in a year. In the alchemical tradition, the 12 steps symbolize the stages of the great work, the process of spiritual transformation. Each step in Neuschwanstein is decorated with a special symbol that may correspond to one of the stages of this mystical journey. The king's bedroom contains equally interesting symbolic elements. The bed is made in the Gothic style and really resembles an altar, but its design contains hidden elements that may have ritual significance. The headboard is carved with symbols that researchers interpret as runes or other ancient writings. The arrangement of these symbols creates a certain sequence that may represent a spell or prayer. The walls of the bedroom are decorated with scenes from the legend of Tristan and Isolde, but the composition of the frescoes contains additional elements that are not found in traditional versions of the story. The frescoes depict symbols characteristic of alchemical iconography: the sun and moon, the king and queen, various animals and plants. These elements may indicate that the legend of Tristan and Isolde was used as an allegory for the alchemical process. The castle's singing hall is dedicated to Wagner's operas, but its decor contains elements that go beyond a simple illustration of musical works. Scenes from Parsifal, Lohengrin, and other operas are complemented by symbols that may be related to the legend of the Holy Grail. Images of the Holy Grail appear several times in the hall, but in different forms and contexts, which may indicate a complex symbolic program. Of particular interest are the images of swans, which appear in almost every room of the castle. The swan was the heraldic symbol of Ludwig II's family, but in the context of the castle's decor, these birds may have a deeper meaning. In various esoteric traditions, the swan symbolizes spiritual transformation, the transition between worlds, and the connection with the divine. The number of swans in various compositions may also have symbolic meaning. The color scheme of the castle's interiors also follows a certain symbolic logic. The dominant colors, gold, blue, and red, are traditionally associated with alchemical symbolism. Gold symbolizes the sun, perfection, and spiritual enlightenment. Blue is associated with the sky, spirituality, and wisdom. Red signifies the active principle, life force, and transformation. The combination of these colors in certain proportions can represent a symbolic formula. The geometric ornaments used in the castle's decor also contain mystical elements. Frequently encountered pentagrams, hexagrams, octagons, and other figures have special meanings in various esoteric systems. The pentagram is traditionally associated with magic and protection. The hexagram symbolizes the union of opposites, and the octagon represents rebirth and renewal. The castle's lighting system may also have symbolic meaning. The arrangement of windows and lamps creates certain lighting effects at different times of the day, which may be related to astrological or calendar cycles. On certain days of the year, sunlight falls on specific decorative elements, creating the impression that they glow from within. The acoustic properties of the castle's halls may be linked to ancient beliefs about the magical power of sound. In various esoteric traditions, certain sound vibrations were believed to be capable of influencing the mind and inducing altered states. Neuschwanstein's complex acoustic system may have been designed not only to improve the sound of music, but also to create special sound effects. The castle library contained many books on occultism, alchemy, astrology, and other esoteric sciences. Many of these books were rare editions or even manuscripts, indicating the owner's serious interest in mystical knowledge. The arrangement of the books in the library also followed a specific system, which may reflect the hierarchy of esoteric disciplines. King Ludwig II's connections to secret societies remain one of the most mysterious aspects of his biography. There is no documentary evidence of the Bavarian monarch's membership in any occult organizations, but many circumstantial facts indicate that the king was familiar with the activities of such groups and may have maintained contact with them. These connections may have influenced both the architecture of his castles and the circumstances of his death. In the 19th century, there were many secret societies of various orientations operating in Germany. The most famous were Masonic lodges, Rosicrucians, Theosophical circles, and various occult groups interested in magic and alchemy. Many members of the aristocracy and intellectual elite belonged to these organizations, viewing them as a source of ancient knowledge and a means of spiritual development. Ludwig II's interest in esoteric teachings manifested itself in his youth. The king collected a library of rare books on the occult, studied the works of medieval alchemists and mystics, and was interested in Eastern religious systems. Such enthusiasm was unusual for European monarchs of that time and could have attracted the attention of secret societies interested in gaining an influential patron. Some researchers point to Ludwig's possible connections with the Rosicrucian order. This organization, which emerged in the 17th century, brought together people interested in alchemy, Kabbalah, and Christian mysticism. The symbols of the Rosicrucians, the rose and the cross, alchemical signs, geometric figures, are found in the decoration of Neuschwanstein Castle, which may indicate the influence of this teaching on the architectural program. Of particular interest is the figure of Richard Wagner, who was not only a composer, but also a thinker interested in various philosophical and esoteric systems. Wagner had contacts with members of secret societies and included mystical elements in his operas. Ludwig's close friendship with the composer may have been a channel for the king's introduction to occult circles. The architect Christian Jank, who created the first sketches of Neuschwanstein, may also have been connected to esoteric circles. Jank was a theater artist and decorator, a profession that at the time often involved familiarity with symbolism and mythology. Some elements of the castle's decor so accurately reproduce occult symbols that their creation without special knowledge seems unlikely. The financing of Ludwig's castles also raises questions about the possible involvement of secret societies. Official sources of funding did not cover all of the king's expenses, suggesting the existence of additional sources of funds. Some secret societies of the time had significant financial resources and may have been interested in supporting projects related to their ideology. The king's correspondence contains mysterious references to brothers, initiates, and keepers of ancient wisdom. These terms are characteristic of the language of secret societies and may indicate Ludwig's contacts with such organizations. However, the names of specific correspondents are often encrypted or represented by initials, making them difficult to identify. The peculiarities of the ceremonial at Ludwig II's court may also indicate the influence of secret societies. The king demanded the observance of rituals that were not characteristic of traditional court etiquette. Some of these ceremonies resembled initiations or other rites practiced in occult organizations. The use of special symbols, costumes, and objects also points to a connection with esoteric traditions. The king's guests sometimes mentioned meetings at the castle with people whom Ludwig introduced as teachers or wise men. These characters had no official titles or positions, but apparently enjoyed the king's great respect. Some contemporaries suggested that these people were representatives of secret societies who served as spiritual mentors to the monarch. Ludwig's interest in archaeology and ancient history may also have been linked to the activities of occult groups. The king financed excavations in various regions of Bavaria, taking a particular interest in monuments from the pre-Christian era. Such research often attracted the attention of secret societies that considered themselves the guardians of ancient knowledge and traditions. Ludwig II's death takes on special significance in the context of his possible connections with secret societies. If the king was indeed initiated into some secrets or planned to expose the activities of occult groups, this could have been a motive for his elimination. Some researchers suggest that the tragedy on Lake Starnberg was the result of an internal conflict in esoteric circles. However, it should be noted that most of the evidence of Ludwig II's connections with secret societies is circumstantial and based on interpretations of symbols, coincidences, and rumors. No direct documentary evidence of the king's membership in occult organizations has been found, which makes it necessary to treat these theories with caution. Rumors about occult rituals being performed at Neuschwanstein Castle began to spread during King Ludwig II's lifetime, but these stories became particularly popular after his mysterious death. Castle servants told of strange ceremonies that took place at night in various rooms of the castle, especially in the throne room and basement. Although many of these stories may have been exaggerated or distorted, some details deserve the attention of researchers. The most detailed evidence of the rituals in the castle was left by the king's valet, who served Ludwig for many years. According to his memoirs, the king regularly held night ceremonies that included reading ancient texts, lighting candles in a specific order, and reciting spells in Latin or other ancient languages. These activities took place on strictly defined days, which, according to the valet, corresponded to the astrological calendar. According to eyewitness accounts, the castle's throne room was used for the most solemn ceremonies. The king would don special garments that were not part of the official royal wardrobe, but rather resembled ritual vestments from various religious or mystical traditions. He wore a crown on his head, different from the official Bavarian crown, decorated with symbols that his servants could not identify. Of particular interest are the descriptions of ceremonies associated with the full moon. On these days, the king demanded complete silence in the castle and allowed no one to approach him except his most trusted servants. The rituals lasted from midnight until dawn and included complex actions with various objects: cups, staffs, crystals, and ancient books. The meaning of these actions remained unclear even to those present. According to the servants, the castle's basement rooms were equipped for special rituals. Here there were stone altars, sacrificial tables, and other objects that had no obvious practical purpose. The walls of the cellars were decorated with symbols and inscriptions in unknown languages. Only the king and a few specially trusted individuals had access to these rooms. The use of incense and aromatic substances was a characteristic feature of the rituals at Neuschwanstein. The king ordered rare and expensive incense from all over the world, some of which, according to merchants, were traditionally used in the magical practices of various cultures. The scents of these substances spread throughout the castle during ceremonies, creating a special atmosphere. The musical accompaniment to the rituals also differed from the usual concerts held at the castle. The king demanded the performance of ancient chants, Gregorian chorales, and melodies, which he called music of the spheres. Sometimes specially invited musicians took part in these ceremonies, arriving at the castle incognito and leaving immediately after the rituals were over. According to eyewitness accounts, the calendar of rituals was linked not only to astrological cycles, but also to Christian holidays. Particularly solemn ceremonies were held on the days of the equinoxes and solstices, as well as during periods corresponding to ancient pagan holidays. This combination of Christian and pre-Christian traditions is characteristic of many esoteric systems. Apart from the king himself, the participants in the rituals remained largely unknown. Servants mentioned people in masks or hoods who arrived at the castle on the days of the ceremonies and left before dawn. The number of participants varied from 3 to 12, which may indicate the structure of the organization to which they belonged. The objects used in the rituals are of particular interest to researchers. Among them are ancient cups, which the king called Grail cups, magic wands decorated with precious stones, crystals of various shapes and sizes, and books in antique bindings. Many of these items disappeared after the king's death, making them difficult to study. The Catholic Church's reaction to the rumors about the rituals in Neuschwanstein was restrained. Officially, the church authorities did not comment on these reports, but it is known that several priests tried to obtain an audience with the king to discuss his religious practices. Ludwig refused these meetings, claiming that his relationship with God did not need mediation. The influence of these rituals on the king's mental state remains a subject of debate. Some researchers suggest that participation in occult practices may have exacerbated Ludwig's psychological problems and contributed to the development of his megalomania and other symptoms that were later used to declare him incompetent. The connection between the rituals in the castle and the king's building projects is also interesting. Some elements of Neuschwanstein's architecture may have been designed specifically for ceremonies. The acoustic features of the halls, the placement of windows to create lighting effects, and the symbolic meaning of decorative elements could all have served ritual purposes. After Ludwig II's death, all material evidence of possible rituals was carefully removed from the castle. The library of occult literature was confiscated, ritual objects disappeared, and the basement rooms were closed to visitors. Such haste in destroying evidence may indicate a desire on the part of the authorities to conceal the true interests and activities of the late king. The legacy of the dreamer King Ludwig II goes far beyond the architectural monuments he left to posterity. His personality and mysterious fate have been a source of inspiration for many writers, artists, composers, and filmmakers. The image of the mad king who built fairy tale castles and died under mysterious circumstances has become firmly established in European culture and continues to attract the attention of researchers from a wide variety of fields. The literary legacy associated with Ludwig II includes dozens of novels, short stories, and biographical works. German writers of the late 19th century were the first to turn to the image of the romantic king, creating a literary myth about a monarch who preferred the world of dreams to real politics. Ludwig's interpretation as the last representative of the passing era of Romanticism, unable to adapt to the pragmatic world of the New Germany, became particularly popular. The king's musical legacy is inextricably linked to his patronage of Richard Wagner. Thanks to Ludwig's financial support, the composer's greatest operas, including The Ring of the Nibelung and Parsifal, were created and staged. Without this support, the world's musical culture might have been deprived of these masterpieces. Wagner himself considered Ludwig his spiritual brother and dedicated several works to him. The architectural influence of Ludwig II's castles extended far beyond Bavaria. The neo-Romanesque and neo-Gothic styles embodied in Neuschwanstein, Linderhof, and Herrenchiemsee influenced the architecture of many countries. This influence is particularly noticeable in the United States, where dozens of castles and mansions inspired by Bavarian models were built in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Ludwig II's cinematic legacy began in the silent film era. The first films about the Mad King appeared in the 1920s and immediately won the hearts of audiences. The image of a romantic monarch surrounded by mystery and legend proved extremely appealing to filmmakers. Over the past decades, more than 30 films have been made about Ludwig II. The tourist significance of Ludwig II's castles cannot be overestimated. Neuschwanstein has become one of the most recognizable symbols not only of Germany, but of all of Europe. Every year, the castle is visited by more than 1.5 million tourists, making it one of the continent's main tourist attractions. The income from tourism has paid for the construction of the castle many times over. The influence on popular culture is evident in the use of the image of Neuschwanstein in various works of popular art. The castle became the prototype for Disney's Sleeping Beauty castle, making it recognizable all over the world. The image of the fairy tale castle from Disney cartoons and films is largely based on the architecture of Neuschwanstein. The king's scientific legacy is linked to his interest in various fields of knowledge. Ludwig financed archaeological excavations, supported research in history and art history, and assembled a unique library of rare books. Many scientific discoveries and publications of the late 19th century were made possible thanks to his patronage. Psychological studies of Ludwig II's personality continue to this day. His case is considered one of the classic examples in the history of psychiatry. Although modern experts question the diagnoses made by the king's contemporaries, the study of Ludwig's personality has contributed to the development of understanding of various mental states and their influence on creative activity. The king's esoteric legacy attracts the attention of researchers of the occult and the history of secret societies. The symbolism used in the architecture of his castles is analyzed by specialists in various esoteric traditions. Some modern occult groups consider Ludwig II one of their spiritual predecessors. The king's political legacy is linked to his role in the history of German unification. Although Ludwig was unable to prevent Bavaria from being incorporated into the German Empire, his resistance to Prussian hegemony became a symbol of Bavarian separatism. Contemporary Bavarian politicians sometimes refer to Ludwig II's example in their speeches in favor of expanding the region's autonomy. The king's economic legacy is paradoxical. Although his construction projects bankrupted Bavaria, they generated enormous revenues in the long term. The tourist industry associated with Ludwig II's castles has become one of the most important sectors of the Bavarian economy, generating hundreds of millions of euros annually. The king's philosophical legacy is linked to his ideas about the role of art in human life and society. Ludwig believed that beauty could transform the world and elevate the human spirit. His castles were conceived not simply as residential buildings, but as temples of art capable of inspiring and ennobling people. This philosophy influenced the development of aesthetic theories in the late 19th century. Legends and myths surrounding Ludwig II continue to evolve today. Each new generation creates its own interpretation of his personality and fate. In the age of the Internet, new theories and versions related to the king's activities have emerged, demonstrating the enduring interest in this historical figure. Ludwig II remains one of the most mysterious and fascinating characters in European history. Today, Neuschwanstein Castle is a unique phenomenon in world culture. It is simultaneously a historical monument, a tourist attraction, and a place that continues to attract people seeking mystical experiences and spiritual revelations. In the century and a half since its construction, the castle has been transformed from the private residence of an eccentric king into a symbol of romantic Europe, while retaining its aura of mystery and intrigue. The modern tourist industry has made Neuschwanstein one of the most visited places in Germany. The castle welcomes up to 6,000 visitors every day, which poses certain challenges for the preservation of the historic interiors. Tours last only 35 minutes and cover only a small part of the castle, but even this is enough to leave a lasting impression on visitors. Scientific research at the castle is ongoing. Historians, art historians, and architects are studying various aspects of this unique monument. Modern technology allows them to discover hidden details of the architecture and decor that previously went unnoticed. X-ray examinations of the walls have revealed hidden cavities and channels whose purpose remains unclear. Restoration work has been ongoing at the castle since it was opened to the public. Special attention is paid to preserving the original materials and techniques of the 19th century. Restorers face unique challenges, as many of the castle's decorative elements and engineering systems are unlike anything found in other historical monuments. Esoteric tourism is becoming an increasingly popular destination for visitors to Neuschwanstein. People interested in the occult, astrology, and other mystical teachings come to the castle specifically in search of special energies and spiritual experiences. Some claim to feel the presence of unusual forces in the castle or to have mystical visions. Geophysical studies of the castle's surroundings have revealed several anomalous zones with increased magnetic activity. These anomalies may have existed during the time of Ludwig II and may have influenced the choice of location for the castle. Some researchers suggest that such geophysical features could have created conditions for altered states of consciousness. The psychological impact of Neuschwanstein's architecture is being studied by specialists in environmental psychology. Research shows that spending time in the castle does indeed affect the mental state of visitors, evoking feelings of awe, excitement, and sometimes mild anxiety. These effects may be related to both the architectural features of the building and its historical aura. Modern technology allows us to take a new look at the castle and its history. Virtual reconstructions show what Neuschwanstein would have looked like if construction had been completed according to the original plans. Three-dimensional modeling helps to understand the logic behind the architectural decisions and reveal hidden patterns in the layout of the building. Neuschwanstein's cultural influence continues to grow in the age of globalization. Images of the castle are used in advertising, on postage stamps, and in souvenirs around the world. Architectural elements of Neuschwanstein are copied in the construction of hotels, restaurants, and entertainment centers in various countries. Educational programs related to the castle attract students and researchers from around the world. Universities organize special courses on Romantic architecture, Bavarian history, and the personality of Ludwig II. The castle has been the subject of hundreds of theses, dissertations, and scientific publications. The environmental aspects of maintaining the castle also require constant attention. The large number of tourists puts a strain on the surrounding natural environment. The Bavarian authorities are developing sustainable tourism programs aimed at preserving the ecological balance in the castle area. Technological innovations are gradually being introduced into the museum practice at Neuschwanstein. Augmented reality audio guides allow visitors to see the castle through the eyes of its creators. Interactive exhibitions tell the story of the castle's construction and the life of Ludwig II using modern multimedia technologies. International cooperation in the study and preservation of the castle is actively developing. Neuschwanstein is included in various European programs for the preservation of cultural heritage. The experience of restoring and maintaining the castle is being passed on to specialists from other countries working with similar monuments. The mysteries of Neuschwanstein remain unsolved to this day. Every year, researchers discover new architectural details or find previously unknown documents related to the castle. Perhaps a complete understanding of Ludwig II's vision and the true purpose of his fairy tale castle will never be achieved. But it is precisely this mystery that makes Neuschwanstein one of the most attractive places on Earth. The future of the castle lies in striking a balance between preserving its historical heritage and satisfying the growing interest of tourists. There are plans to create new exhibition spaces that will tell the castle's story in greater detail without damaging the historic interiors. Neuschwanstein continues to live and evolve, remaining a bridge between the past and the future, between reality and dreams.